you doing this to me, my daughter?
She was a millionaire, but her daughter buried her alive to steal her fortune. Imagine waking up in the dark, no light, barely any air. Your hands touch rough wood above your head. You scream, but no one hears. The smell of damp earth fills your lungs. Then you understand you've been buried alive, and by whom? By the one person who swore to love you forever. The whole world believed Victoria Hayes had vanished. Newspapers speculated about a romantic getaway, maybe a nervous breakdown, perhaps an early retirement on some tropical island. But the truth was just a few feet underground, right beneath the Italian heels of those strolling across the marble floors of that lavish mansion. In the basement, a 60-year-old woman fought against time, against the thinning oxygen, against her own sanity. Upstairs, her daughter, her only daughter, was toasting with crystal flutes filled with Dom Perignon. The plan had worked. The empire now had a new queen. But fate has a long memory, and at that very moment someone was about to make a discovery that would turn that deception into a nightmare. Because the woman everyone believed dead was still breathing, and she had a story to tell that would make the entire world tremble. Are you ready to know the truth? Victoria Hayes wasn't just rich. She was a force of nature. At 60, she ran Hayes International the way a maestro conducts an orchestra. Every movement precise, every decision final, every word measured with the accuracy of someone who had turned a family business into a billion-dollar empire. On Monday mornings, she would stride through the marble lobby of the corporate tower while employees lowered their eyes in silent reverence. Her Chanel suit immaculate, her platinum hair pulled into a perfect bun, her blue eyes sharp enough to freeze dissent with a single glance. Victoria never demanded respect. She earned it, second by second, decision by decision. But power has a price, and hers was paid in loneliness. Her husband, Richard Hayes, had died 5 years earlier, a heart attack on the golf course. Since then, the king-size bed in her Bel Air mansion had been far too cold, far too empty. The walls lined with modern art didn't speak. The crystal chandeliers lit dinners for one. Victoria Hayes had everything, except someone to share it with. And then there was Isabel, her daughter, 32 years old, beautiful by design, ambition carefully disguised. Isabel had grown up in the shadow of a giant, and that shadow had turned her into something dark. Every achievement of her mother's was a personal humiliation. Every compliment directed at the CEO was an insult to the daughter, who never managed to escape the comfortable mediocrity of being the heiress. "You've always loved the company more than me, Mother," Isabel had said one tense evening over dinner in the mansion's grand dining room. The red wine trembled dangerously in her glass. "Admit it. Your contracts matter more than your own daughter." Victoria sighed, weary of a fight that had lasted decades. "Isabel, I built all of this for you, so you could have a future. I don't want a future, I want a present, I want you to see me." But Victoria no longer knew how to look. Work had consumed her ability to see beyond numbers, strategies, acquisitions. And in that dangerous void between mother and daughter, something far darker began to take root. That night Isabel left the table without saying goodbye. Her heels echoed down the marble hall like a verdict. Victoria stayed behind, staring at the family portrait on the wall, her, Richard, and a young, smiling Isabel. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered to the emptiness. The emptiness didn't answer. It never did. But in the months to come, Victoria would learn there was something far worse than loneliness, the betrayal of someone you love. And before she knew it, the powerful, feared, invincible woman would be fighting for her life in the depths of her own home. The Queen had everything, but she was about to lose even the freedom to breathe. Ethan Cole entered Hayes International, like a hurricane disguised as a breeze. 28, with a toothpaste commercial smile and suits that fit his athletic frame with calculated precision. He was the new intern in the International Expansion Department, too young to have that kind of confidence, too sharp to be just another pretty face. Victoria met him during a strategic planning meeting. He presented a market analysis that left directors with 40 years of experience uncomfortably silent. He spoke with cutting clarity, gestured with assurance, and when he finished, he had the audacity to look Victoria straight in the eyes and ask, "What do you think, ma'am?" She should have seen the signs, should have realized that his attention was rehearsed, his interest manufactured. But it had been so long since anyone looked at her as a woman and not a CEO that Victoria allowed herself to believe. The conversations began innocently. Coffee after meetings, then dinners, to discuss strategy. Ethan had a gift. He could make Victoria laugh, something she had forgotten how to do. He listened to her stories with what felt like genuine interest. He touched her hand across the table with a tenderness that melted decades of emotional armor. "Victoria," he said one night in a restaurant overlooking the ocean, "you're the most fascinating woman I've ever met. Not because of the company, because of who you are when no one's watching." She smiled, her blue eyes shining with dangerous vulnerability. "Ethan, you're young enough to be my son. People will talk. Let them," he said, holding her hand firmly. "Life's too short to live as prisoners of other people's opinions." And Victoria, tired of being alone, tired of being strong, tired of sleeping in an empty bed, allowed herself to fall. Isabel, of course, exploded. "Mum, have you completely lost your mind?" she shouted in the middle of the living room when she found out about the affair. "He's young enough to be your son. People are laughing at you. People always talk, Isabel. I've learned not to care." "Not care? He's manipulating you. He wants your money, your company, your power." Victoria stood, her voice cold as ice. "Ethan makes me happy. Something you've never cared to do." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Isabel stared at her mother with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. "You'll regret this, mother, I promise." But Victoria didn't listen. She was in love, or thought she was. Ethan took her on weekend trips, showered her with attention and sweet words, promised a future where she wouldn't have to choose between power and love. What Victoria didn't know was that every kiss was a lie, every promise a trap, and while she dreamed of a new beginning, in the shadows a diabolical plan was being woven. Love can blind even the sharpest eyes, and Victoria was about to discover that blindness comes with a deadly price. Isabel Hayes's apartment, 2 in the morning. The city light seeped through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows that danced across the white walls. Isabel sat on an Italian leather sofa, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "She trusts you," Isabel said, her voice low and venomous. "Completely." Ethan walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Outside, Los Angeles shimmered like an ocean of promises. "I know, and that makes me uncomfortable." Isabel laughed, a dry, cutting sound. "Uncomfortable? Were you uncomfortable when you agreed to the plan? When you kissed me for the first time while she was at the table? When you promised we'd do this together?" She stood, walked behind him, and ran her fingers across his shoulder. "Don't grow a conscience now, Ethan. We're far past the point of no return." He turned to face her. "Isabel, we're talking about your mother. We're talking about billions of dollars, a lifetime of freedom, of power." She cupped his face in her hands. "Do you want it or not?" A heavy silence, then Ethan sighed. "I want it." "Good. Then let's go over the plan." Isabel returned to the sofa and opened her laptop on the coffee table. The screen lit up her face with a ghostly glow. "The paperwork's almost ready. The power of attorney that transfers control of the company to me, the updated will, everything. All we need is her signature. And how do we get that? You'll take her to the cabin in Big Sur. Romantic weekend, fireplace, ocean view. You'll cook her dinner. In the wine you'll mix the sedative." She slid a small box across the table. Inside was a vial of clear liquid. "Exact dose. Won't kill her, just knocks her out long enough. She'll sign everything without even realizing it. You'll guide her hand." Ethan held the vial up to the light. "And after that, then we bring her back to the mansion, to the basement." "Isabel, listen," she cut in, her voice now icy. "We can't just make her disappear. That would draw too much attention, police, investigations. But if she vanishes after signing everything over to me, after showing signs of exhaustion, depression, after I plant the right narrative in the press, then the world believes she ran away, had a breakdown, gave up everything. How long does she stay down there?" Isabel took a long sip of wine. "As long as it takes, until things calm down, until we have complete control. Then we decide." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Decide what exactly?" She looked at him without blinking. "Whether she keeps breathing or not." The silence that followed was broken only by distant sirens from the street. Ethan knew he should stand up, walk out, report this madness. But the image of money, power, the life he'd always wanted and never had, it was too strong. "When do we do it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabel smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Friday. She's already agreed to the trip. And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong. You're charming, convincing. She's blinded by love. It's the perfect crime, Ethan. And when it's done, we'll own everything." They clinked their glasses. The sound of crystal echoed like a death sentence. Outside, the city kept shining, indifferent to the evil being plotted in that apartment. 3 days later, Victoria Hayes would step into Ethan's car with a smile on her face, unaware she was being driven to her own grave. Darkness, absolute, suffocating. Victoria opened her eyes, but it was as if they were still closed. No light, no shape, just the infinite black swallowing her whole. She tried to move her arms, sharp pain in her wrists. She tried to scream. Her voice came out hoarse, broken, echoing in a confined space. Where was she? Her hands felt around. Rough wood above her head, packed earth on both sides. The damp, almost rotten smell of soil and mold invaded her nostrils. Her heart raced. Panic. Pure, primal panic. "Somebody help me!" she screamed, pounding on the wood above. The structure didn't budge. Ethan, where are you?" Silence. Only the sound of her own breath, quick and shallow, eating up the little oxygen left. It wasn't exactly a coffin. It was a hidden compartment beneath the basement floor, sealed with a wooden lid and 2 narrow air vents disguised within the old HVAC system. Above, Isabel shoveled soil and carpet dust to muffle the noise. Buried alive. That's how it felt, and that's exactly how Isabel wanted her to feel. Then slowly, memories began to return. The cabin in Big Sur, the candle-lit dinner, the wine that tasted slightly bitter, but she drank it anyway. Ethan was looking at her with those eyes, saying he loved her, that he wanted to spend his life with her. Then, nothing. Darkness. And now, this. Victoria began piecing it together, shard by shard, the horrifying truth. Ethan had drugged her. Ethan had brought her to, where? Her own house. No, impossible. But the smell, it was familiar. The humidity, the temperature, the muffled creaks from above. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm in the basement of my own house. And if she was here, buried, trapped, then—" "Isabel," she said aloud, her daughter's name leaving her lips like a curse. "Isabel did this." Tears burned her eyes, not from sadness, from fury, from betrayal. Her own daughter, her only daughter. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Impossible to tell. Victoria screamed until her voice was gone. She pounded the wood until her hands bled, but no one came. No one heard. Meanwhile, upstairs, Isabel Hayes was giving a press conference. Cameras flashed like fireflies as she stood dressed in sober black, dabbing non-existent tears with a silk handkerchief. "My mother was exhausted," she said, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "She built an empire, but the price was too high. In recent months, I noticed signs of depression, of fatigue. I tried to help, but she pushed me away." A reporter asked, "Have you contacted the police?" "Yes, of course, but honestly, I think my mother just needed time for herself. Maybe she's at a retreat, somewhere peaceful. I just want her to know she can come back, that I love her." The tears fell perfectly. The public believed every word. Ethan stood at the back of the room watching. He felt the weight of guilt pressing on his chest, but also the intoxication of success. It had worked. The world believed. That night, he and Isabel toasted again, this time with real champagne. "To the new era of Hayes International," Isabel said, raising her glass. "To the new era," Ethan echoed, but his voice lacked conviction. Meters below them, Victoria Hayes was scratching desperate messages into the wood with her broken nails. While the world mourned her disappearance, she fought not to become what everyone already thought she was, a corpse. 3 weeks after the disappearance, Isabel Hayes sat in the leather chair that had once belonged to her mother. The office on the 47th floor offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles. The setting sun painted the sky orange and red, as if the city itself were bleeding. She signed the last document with a Mont Blanc pen that cost more than most people's monthly salary. A satisfied smile curved her lips. Hayes International was now officially hers. "Congratulations, darling," Ethan said, walking into the office with 2 crystal flutes. "You did it." Isabel took a glass and tapped it lightly against his. "We did it. Don't forget that." He perched on the edge of the desk, gaze drifting over the city below. "How much longer, Isabel? How much longer what?" "You know very well what." She took a long sip, savoring the champagne like liquid victory. "Until I decide. She's comfortable enough. I leave water, a little food. I'm not being cruel." "Not being cruel?" Ethan shot to his feet. "Isabel, your mother has been locked in a hole in the floor for 3 weeks. Keep your voice down," she hissed, her eyes suddenly sharp as blades. Walls have ears, and you're just as involved as I am. If she gets out, we both go to prison. Tense silence. Sometimes, Ethan said softly, I wonder if you feel anything at all. Isabel set her glass on the desk with a hard clink. I do. I feel relief. I feel freedom. For the first time in my life, I'm not living in her shadow. Do you know how humiliating it is to be Victoria Hayes's daughter? To be introduced as the daughter of the great CEO? Never good enough, never seen? So this is revenge. This is justice. Ethan shook his head. No, justice would be confronting her, walking away, building your own life. This is something else. Isabel moved closer, ran her fingers along his jaw. Are you scared? Or feeling guilty? A little of both. Then think about the money, the cars, the trips, the freedom. She kissed him lightly. Think about us. But Ethan could think of nothing except Victoria's eyes when she looked at him with love. Real love. And he returned it with lies. In the basement, Victoria had stopped screaming. Conserving energy was everything. She learned to ration it the way she rationed the water Isabel poured through a small tube once a day. She learned to count hours by the pattern of footsteps above. She learned to survive on crumbs, but more than survive, Victoria planned. In the long stretches of absolute silence, her mind worked. If she got out, and she would, she had to believe that. Every person involved would pay. With her nails, she scratched into the wood. Not words of despair, words of promise. I will survive, and you will pay. Upstairs, Isabel toasted with the new directors. Signed million-dollar contracts. Gave interviews about honoring her mother's legacy. The contrast was obscene. Luxury and despair separated by only a few feet of concrete. But fate is patient, and it was about to send someone who would change everything. Daniel Reed was never one to ask questions. For 20 years, he simply did his job. Operations manager at Hayes International. Discreet, efficient, invisible in the way loyal employees often are. But Daniel had something most others didn't. He genuinely cared about Victoria Hayes. Not romantically, at least not consciously. It was respect, admiration. She had hired him when no one else would, after a brutal divorce that left him financially and emotionally wrecked. Victoria gave him a chance, and Daniel never forgot. So when she vanished overnight, something didn't add up. She would never do that, he murmured to himself, scrolling through Victoria's last emails. Everything looked normal. Meetings scheduled, deals in progress. No hint she planned to disappear. He went to see Isabel in her office. The new CEO was radiant, dressed all in white, as if celebrating something rather than mourning. Daniel, come in, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. Miss Hayes, forgive the intrusion, but I need to understand what happened to your mother. The smile faltered, imperceptibly. You heard. She was exhausted. She stepped away. Without telling anyone? Without closing ongoing deals? That doesn't sound like the Victoria I know. Isabel stood and walked to the window. People change, Daniel, especially under pressure. May I access the security footage from the mansion? She spun around. Why? Just to be sure she left of her own accord. The cameras were under maintenance that week. Bad luck. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were ice. Daniel knew a lie when he heard one. I see, excuse me. He left her office certain something was very, very wrong. In the days that followed, Daniel began his own quiet investigation. He spoke with staff, combed through documents, hunted for inconsistencies, and he found them. A power of attorney signed by Victoria, but the handwriting was slightly off, as if someone had guided her hand. There was more. Odd bank transfers, altered contracts, small lies that taken together formed a mosaic of fraud, but the final piece of the puzzle came by chance. Daniel decided to visit the Hayes mansion, officially to collect some documents Victoria had requested before she disappeared. Isabel was on a business trip. Ethan, supposedly too. The house was empty, silent, ghostly. Daniel walked the marble halls, remembering the times he'd been there for meetings. Everything looked the same, yet different, as if Victoria's absence had sucked the life out of the place. He was about to leave when he heard it. A sound, muffled, distant, almost imperceptible. A moan. He froze, listened harder. Silence. Maybe he'd imagined it. Then he heard it again, from below, the basement. Daniel's heart kicked into a sprint. He went down the stairs, each step echoing like a drum. The basement was for storage. Old boxes, furniture draped with sheets, a moldy smell clinging to everything. And there, in the darkest corner, he saw it. A door he didn't remember being there, or maybe it had always been there, forever locked, forever ignored. He moved closer. A heavy rug covered it, as if someone had tried to hide it. Daniel pulled the rug aside and saw the wooden hatch. Dear God! He knelt, ran his fingers along the edge, and then he heard it clearly. A voice. Faint. Desperate. Help! Please! Help! Victoria! Daniel felt the world tilt. With trembling hands, he began to lift the hatch. What he found on the other side would change everything. The hatch was heavy, solid wood, likely bolted from the outside. Daniel pulled hard, muscles screaming with effort. Once, twice. On the third try, the wood gave with a high, tearing creak that echoed through the basement like a scream. And then he saw. Victoria Hayes lay in a space no more than 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Her face was pale, almost cadaverous, her lips cracked, her once immaculate hair plastered to her face with sweat and grime. Her blue eyes, once so piercing, were dull now, but still alive, still conscious. She looked up, blinking against the light pouring into the hole. For a moment she seemed not to recognize him. Then tears began to spill. "Daniel?" The word was a ragged whisper, shredded by weeks of unanswered screams. "My God, Victoria! My God!" He jumped down into the pit, ignoring the stench, the filth, everything. He took her gently by the arms, as if she might shatter at his touch. "You're alive. You're alive. Isabel," she whispered, each word a battle. It was Isabel, and Ethan. I know, but you're safe now. I'm getting you out." Daniel tried to lift her, but Victoria's legs wouldn't respond. Weeks without proper movement had stolen her strength. He gathered her into his arms and heaved her up through the opening, nearly losing his footing, but somehow made it. He laid her carefully on the concrete floor. Victoria panted, eyes closed, as if the simple act of breathing open air was exhausting. "I need to call an ambulance," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. "No." Her voice came out firm for the first time. She opened her eyes and fixed him with an intensity that seemed impossible in her state. "Police first. I want them arrested before they even reach the hospital. Before they can run." Daniel nodded. He dialed. As the line rang, Victoria whispered, "Thank you. You saved me. You would have done the same for me." The smile she managed was faint, but real. "I know." 40 minutes later, the Hayes mansion was surrounded by police cruisers. Red and blue lights washed over walls that had seen too much luxury and too much suffering. Isabel and Ethan were found at a 5-star restaurant downtown, toasting with oysters and champagne. When the officers walked in, Isabel didn't even have time to react. The cuffs snapped around her wrists with a finality that left no room for doubt. "You're making a mistake," she shouted as they dragged her out under a forest of flashing cameras. "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." Ethan said nothing. He only lowered his head, shoulders caving under the guilt that finally crushed him. In the ambulance, Victoria lay on a gurney wrapped in thermal blankets. A paramedic checked her vitals while another started an IV. She was weak, dehydrated, but alive. Miraculously alive. Daniel held her hand. "You're going to be okay. I promise." Victoria squeezed back, however faintly. "I always knew you were special, Daniel. I always knew." And as the ambulance cut through Los Angeles with sirens wailing, something shifted in that small, bright space. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition, the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. The woman who had been buried alive was returning to the world, and she carried with her a thirst for justice, fierce enough to shake the heavens. The press room was packed. Journalists from every major outlet jostled for position, cameras aimed at the stage where one of the decade's most shocking revelations was about to unfold. Outside, protesters held signs. "Justice for Victoria Hayes! Jail the traitors!" The story had spread like wildfire. A billionaire CEO buried alive by her own daughter. It sounded like a movie plot, but it was real, terrifyingly real. When the doors opened, silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. Victoria Hayes entered in a wheelchair pushed by Daniel. She was visibly thinner, her face still marked by suffering, but there was something different in her eyes. No longer the vulnerability Ethan had exploited, no longer the blindness Isabel had manipulated. It was pure fire, a determination that burned like an eternal flame. She wore something simple, a navy suit, no jewelry, no display. She didn't need it. Her presence alone was statement enough. Daniel positioned the chair behind the lectern. Flashes erupted like a lightning storm. Victoria waited. Let the moment stretch. And then she spoke. "My name is Victoria Hayes, and for 23 days, I was a prisoner in the basement of my own home. The room exploded into murmurs. She raised a hand for silence. I was betrayed by the two people I trusted most. My daughter, Isabel Hayes, and my then-boyfriend, Ethan Cole, devised a plan to drug me, forge my signature on legal documents, and bury me alive while they stole my company and my fortune. A reporter shouted, "How did you survive?" Victoria looked straight into the camera. "I survived because I refused to die. Because even in the dark, even with not enough air, even believing I might never be found, part of me refused to give up. And I survived because a good man, Daniel Reed, had the courage to seek the truth when everyone else accepted the lies." Standing beside her, Daniel flushed. Victoria looked at him with a gratitude that words couldn't hold. "Today, I want the world to know that Isabel Hayes and Ethan Cole will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Attempted homicide, kidnapping, corporate fraud, forgery. Every crime will be paid for." Another reporter asked, "Do you have anything to say to your daughter?" Victoria closed her eyes for a beat. When she opened them again, there were tears, but also resolve. "Isabel, you were my only daughter. I loved you from the moment I first held you. I built an empire thinking it would be yours, but somewhere along the way I failed. I failed to show you that love can't be bought with money. I failed to teach you empathy, compassion, humanity. For that, I carry my share of blame. But what you did, it's unforgivable. You are dead to me, and I hope prison teaches you what I could not." Silence. Even the cameras seemed to stop clicking. Victoria drew a long breath. "And to Ethan, you are simply pathetic. You used my love, my loneliness, my hope for a fresh start as weapons against me. There is no punishment sufficient for what you did, but time will tell." She paused, adjusted herself in the chair. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to rest. I have a long recovery ahead, but I'll be back. I'll be back stronger. I'll be back to rebuild what was stolen from me, and I'll be back to make sure no one else falls victim to this kind of betrayal." Daniel started to wheel her off stage, but Victoria raised her hand again. "Oh, one last thing." She looked directly into the main camera. "To those who bet I would never stand again, you bet wrong." Applause started small, then swelled into a standing ovation. Victoria didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply left with the dignity of someone who had survived hell and returned to tell the tale. In jail, Isabel watched the conference on a small TV in her cell. When her mother said she was dead to her, something cracked. Not remorse, not regret, just the final understanding that she had lost, completely. Ethan, in another cell, wept like a child. He tried to justify himself to lawyers, to guards, to anyone who would listen. "I was manipulated. Isabel made me do it. I was scared." But no one believed him, and frankly no one cared. Justice at last had their names, and it wouldn't be letting go anytime soon. 6 months later, spring had come to Los Angeles with unexpected gentleness. Jacarandas bloomed in violet shades that painted the streets, as if the city had dressed itself for a celebration. And in a way, there was reason to celebrate. Victoria Hayes was standing, literally. After months of intensive physical therapy, she had left the wheelchair behind. She still used a cane, more for caution than necessity, but walking again was a victory no amount of money could buy. She was in the mansion's garden, the same garden where she used to drink coffee alone on cold mornings. But today she wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside her, watering the rose bushes Victoria had insisted on planting herself. "You don't have to do this," he said, smiling. "We have gardeners." "I know, but I want to. I need to feel the earth in my hands. I need to remember that I'm alive." She looked at him, her blue eyes regaining the brightness that had seemed lost forever. "Thank you for everything. You've thanked me 1,000 times, and it's still not enough." Daniel set the hose aside and stepped closer. For months they had danced around something neither dared to name. He'd been at her side for every medical appointment, every court hearing, every rough night when the darkness crept back into her dreams. Somewhere along the way, gratitude had become something deeper. "Victoria," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you were down there in the dark, what did you think about?" She looked away, watching the red roses sway in the breeze. "I thought about surviving. I thought about justice. But I also thought about you." Daniel blinked. "Me?" "About how kind you are. How you've always been discreet, loyal, present, even when I didn't notice. How blind I was to look for love in the wrong places when it was right in front of me the whole time." His heart hammered. "Victoria, let me finish." She turned to him and took his hand. Ethan taught me that passion without substance is poison. Isabel taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. But you taught me that real love doesn't shout, doesn't overpromise, doesn't need a spotlight. It's the love that simply stays when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Daniel's eyes stung. I've always admired you, since day one, but I never thought that I'd look at you this way. I didn't either. But nearly dying has a way of rearranging priorities. She smiled, a real, warm, unburdened smile. Daniel Reed, would you have dinner with me? A real dinner, not work, not gratitude, a date. He laughed, disbelieving and happy. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. They stood there, hands intertwined, as the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in gold and pink. And for the first time in decades, Victoria Hayes felt something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. A week later, Victoria returned to Hayes International. Not as CEO, she had promoted someone new, deciding it was time to pass the empire to younger, fresher hands. But she returned as chair of the board, with veto power and the hard-won wisdom of someone who had nearly died and been reborn. Her address to the employees gathered in the main auditorium was short, but powerful. I learned something in the dark, she said, her voice carrying through the speakers. I learned that power without character is an illusion, that wealth without humanity is a prison, and that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in how many lives we touch with kindness. She glanced at Daniel in the front row and smiled. I almost lost everything, and in the process I discovered what truly matters. So move this company forward, build, innovate, but never, never forget that, in the end, we're only human, and humans need one another. The applause was thunderous. Victoria Hayes had returned, not as the woman she once was, but as something better, a survivor with an open heart and a renewed purpose. 1 year after the day Daniel found Victoria buried alive, the trial of Isabel Hayes and Ethan Cole finally came to an end. The courtroom was packed. Onlookers, journalists, employees of Hayes International. Everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of the story that had shocked the world. Isabel sat at the defense table, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit that contrasted cruelly with the designer dresses she once flaunted. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. A year of pre-trial detention had stripped away all the arrogance that once defined her. Ethan, seated beside her, somehow looked smaller, as if the weight of guilt had literally shrunk him. He didn't look at anyone, especially not at Victoria, who sat in the front row beside Daniel. The judge, an elderly man with white hair and a stern expression, read the verdict in a voice that allowed no argument. Isabel Hayes, you have been found guilty of attempted aggravated homicide, unlawful imprisonment, corporate fraud, and falsification of documents. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Isabel didn't react. It was as if she already knew, as if deep down she had always known that fate would demand its price. Ethan Cole, you have been found guilty of the same crimes with mitigating factors due to your cooperation with law enforcement. You are sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. Ethan finally looked at Victoria. He tried to say something. Perhaps I'm sorry, perhaps forgive me. But she turned her gaze away. There was nothing to say. Some betrayals have no words that can heal them. The gavel struck. Sentence delivered. Justice served. Outside the courthouse, Victoria gave a brief statement to the press. I don't feel joy about this verdict, she said. I feel sorrow for what could have been and wasn't. Isabel was my daughter. I loved her. But love doesn't mean accepting the unacceptable. Justice has been done. Now it's time to move forward. A reporter called out, What's next for you, Mrs. Hayes? She looked at Daniel standing right behind her and smiled. To live. Truly live. To build real relationships. To help those in need. And to savor every second, because now I know how much each second is worth. Daniel took her hand. They walked together, away from the cameras, toward the car waiting for them. In the following months, Victoria donated half of her personal fortune to create the Hayes Hope Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women who were victims of family abuse, psychological manipulation, and domestic violence. The first center opened in Los Angeles but quickly expanded to other cities. At the inauguration speech, Victoria spoke openly about her own experience. I was buried alive by the person who was supposed to love me, she said, her voice steady but emotional. And I know there are millions of women buried in other ways, in toxic relationships, in lives of control, in silences that kill slowly. This foundation is for you, to remind you that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a way out. There is always hope. The audience rose in applause. Among them stood dozens of women already helped by the foundation, stories of healing, of rebirth. 2 years after her rescue, Victoria Hayes married Daniel Reed in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, the same garden where she had once planted roses with her own hands. There was no press, no display of wealth, only close friends, loyal employees, and the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. Victoria's dress was simple, white, elegant. Daniel wore a grey suit that made him look like the happiest man alive. And perhaps he was. When they exchanged vows, Victoria said something that made everyone present cry. "Daniel, you found me when I was literally buried. But more than that, you showed me that living isn't just breathing. It's trusting. It's loving without fear. It's building each day knowing the other will be there. Not out of duty, not out of interest, but out of choice. Every day, a choice. I choose you today, and I'll choose you tomorrow. And in every tomorrow, life gives us." Daniel kissed her under the golden sunset, and everyone applauded. But for them, in that moment, there was no one else in the world, just two hearts that had found each other in the most unlikely way imaginable. And what about Isabel? In prison, she began a long process of therapy. Slowly, the layers of resentment peeled away, revealing a truth more painful than any sentence. She had been jealous. Jealous of her mother's strength, jealous of her ability to build, jealous of the admiration Victoria inspired. And that jealousy, fed for years, had turned into hatred, into destruction. Isabel never received her mother's forgiveness. Victoria made it clear that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But what she did offer was something different. A bank account with enough money for Isabel to start over once she was released. Not as an heiress, but as a person, like anyone else trying to rebuild a life. "I'm not doing this for you," Victoria wrote in the letter that came with the bank details. "I'm doing it for me, because I've learned that holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You destroyed my trust, my innocence, nearly my life, but you won't destroy my peace. So take this, use it well, or don't. The choice is yours. But as far as I'm concerned, we're even." Isabel cried as she read the letter, cried like she hadn't since childhood, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to real remorse. In the final scene of our story, Victoria and Daniel walk through the restored garden of the mansion. It's a Sunday morning. The sunlight is gentle. The birds sing a melody that seems written just for them. Victoria stops before the rose bushes, now blooming in vibrant red, and takes a deep breath. "You know what's funny?" she says, looking at Daniel. "What? If none of that had happened, if Isabel hadn't done what she did, I probably never would have looked at you the way I do now. I'd probably still be trapped in a life of appearances, empty relationships, power without purpose." Daniel wraps an arm around her. "Are you saying it was worth it?" Victoria laughs, a sound genuine and free. "No, it wasn't. Those days in the dark were the worst hell anyone can imagine. But what came after, the rebirth? You, our life? That was worth everything." They kiss softly, and the sun seems to shine a little brighter, as if in approval. "The kind of love that's born from respect lasts longer than any fortune," Victoria whispers. "And justice, sooner or later, always finds its way back." Daniel smiles. "Sounds like a movie line. Maybe it is, but it's true. It's my truth." And there, in that garden that had once witnessed so much pain but now overflowed with peace, two people who had found each other in the most improbable way walked hand in hand. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how deep you fall. It doesn't matter how dark it gets. There is always a chance to be reborn. There is always a hand reaching out to pull you back into the light. And when that hand finds yours, hold it tight. Because that is the kind of love worth living for. She was buried alive but refused to die. Betrayed by blood but found family and loyalty. She lost everything, yet gained what truly matters. This is the story of Victoria Hayes, the woman who survived hell and returned not for revenge, but to live, to truly live.